damn it, boy.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, finally we're back making videos. Thank God we're back at it. So yes, we are doing an AP1 cluster swap today on the EJ1. I have to give a big shout out to HookerChris69/LazyMan Garage. Go check him out. Here's his name right here. Go give him a follow on Instagram and go check out his YouTube channel. He's actually got some really great stuff on his channel about polishing, plastic welding, and some other stuff. He's also got a CRX that he's building. Cannot thank him enough. He's the one that hooked me up with the AP1 cluster, as well as the Speedo healer and the Modify temp gauge correction unit. Also, I have to give a big shout out to CJ's Wiring for hooking me up with a set of cluster plugs, pigtails, you can get from him. If you don't have pigtails on your S2000 cluster, he sells them for AP1 and AP2 clusters. He hooked me up with that. We also have the gauge cluster bezel piece that I got off of eBay. There'll be links to all the things in the description below. So please no complaining, because today I'm gonna be doing the cluster swap my way. I'm going to be doing everything wire by wire, and some of you out there are not gonna approve of the way that I do it, but the way that I'm going to do it is I'm not going to be soldering any connections, and the reason for that is I want to be able to go back to the stock cluster. The idea is that I'm going to eject the pins, leave the pins on the original dash harness. I'm going to strip the CJ's wiring pigtails, and I'm going to twist them around and tape them up. It's a secure connection, should be fine. Haven't had any issues with Charlie's car. Charlie had the same way that we wired it up done, and he hasn't had any issues out of it whatsoever. So let's get into it. Okay, so first up, big thanks to LazyMan Garage, HookerChris69. Now, this is a JDM gauge cluster, so it may only put the miles per hour in kilometers, which I am fine with because I'm used to that anyway. A couple of the other things he sent me the Speedo healer version 4. This little box that communicates with the speed sensor and corrects the speed to the cluster. It also claims that it can convert kilometers to miles per hour and vice versa, but I don't know if we'll be able to do that with the cluster. We'll see how that works. And as well as the, see if you can see it, the Modify ECT2 for an AP1 cluster. What this does is this converts your temp sensor into a normal temp sensor so that the S2000 gauge cluster can read it. Now, I believe this is a much cheaper way of doing an S2000 conversion. You can get the K-tuned unit that's all in one, but I believe that's $250. These pieces, the Speedo healer, is much cheaper. Even with the Modify, they cost far less. So you can save at least $100, $150 by doing it this way, especially if you get the cluster with pigtails. Now, one of the other things about using the CJ's harness is that you're going to have to go by the pin numbers because all the wires are the same color. Even though I'm going to be doing this wire by wire, it will not have color coding. I am going to use a guide that if you want to use for this car, I'm going to put it on the screen right now. Now, that guide is the S2000 cluster AP1 pinouts. You can find them on Google, and now I'm going to put the EG Civic 92 to 95 pinouts for the cluster here on the screen now. Now, of course, you can pause the video and take a screenshot of that. Now, the other thing that's important to know before you start typing questions, hey, can you do the same swap on a CRX or an EK? It's the same process. You just have to look up wiring diagram and the pinouts for the cluster of your car. Obviously, the cluster pinouts on the S2000 cluster are going to be the same. Obviously, the AP2 is different, so you need to double check those, and you just match them to where they need to go. Now, the AP1 cluster and the AP2 clusters, they're going to have a lot of extra wires that aren't going to need to be used anyway. But now we're going to get in the car and start tearing this apart. Now, obviously, the first thing I have to do is remove this bezel. There's a screw here, a screw here, and a screw behind the hazard switch here. I'm going to go ahead and remove this and then pull the cluster out. It goes without saying, when you try to pull this out, it's very tricky. Be very careful when you attempt to remove this. Always take your time. Okay, I had this removed. You can see I disconnected the hazard switch and the clock, and this is where the little screws you have to remove that's behind the hazard switch. It can be kind of a pain to pull the hazard switch out. You need a tiny little flat head to remove that. I've already removed 2 screws out of the the cluster. I'm gonna go ahead and remove the other two. Okay, I have removed it. These are the two plugs you're mostly going to worry about. This plug here is for an automatic. The interior was converted to black, and because normally white EGs come with a gray interior, and the dash harness was from an automatic car. So this green plug is for an automatic. These two plugs, one of them is for SRS airbag, and the other is for cruise control. This does get a little crazy when you do this, but it's a straightforward, simple process. I'm going to go wire by wire. Okay, prepare to get confused. I'm going to try to make this as clear as possible. This is the back of the S2000 cluster. This is the A plug, B plug, C plug, and D plug. There are going to be a lot of wires that you do not use, and I'm going to tie them up and keep them separate. The top ones here, like say on this green A plug, the top ones are the 1 through 6, and then the bottom ones are 7 through 14. So, and it's the same on each plug. So you go from left to right. Now, the other thing that you're going to do, the easiest way, just what I'm doing, I've done some Google searches and I've screenshotted. So I've got this reference for the cluster plug here. So if you notice, this has the AP1 and the AP2 wiring. A1 goes over to, and it says seat belt switch. And then of course I have the EG cluster pins here. You're only going to worry about the A and B plug. So A1, blue and white, seatbelt light. So that's going to go to A1 on the green plug. I'm going to pull out A1, which is this one here. I know this is hard to kind of understand and see, but this is A1. I'm going to attach it to A1. The short one's plug A, and the long one is plug B. If you notice here, A1 right there is blue and white. This one on the edge here, blue and white. I'm going to eject that pin, and I'm going to connect it to this wire here. All right, now once I show you how I'm going to do that, then I will do all the rest of them, go line by line, and then we're going to do the Speedo healer and then the Modify temp correct. Okay, now I'm going to inject this blue and white wire here. It's very small, so what I'm going to do is take this little pin tool here that I use a lot. Okay, so before you eject any pins, you have to pop this little white protector piece out like that. What that does is that keeps everything locked in. Now that I've done that, I'm going to stick this little picker tool in here. All right, so I'm going to stick the tool in, lift up on the lock, pull the pin out. Okay, so here's our wire all freed out. Okay, this is what the little clip pin looks like. I'm going to do what everybody hates that I do. And I've pulled my A1 wire out and I've stripped it back, exposing wire, a good bit of it. Now what I'm going to do is twist this around very tightly and tape it. Okay, so I've got the wire twisted around the little pin. All right, very tightly. Everybody can go to the comment section now and hate on me for doing this, but I've done it this way every time. And the reason, I'll say it again, that I'm doing it this way is that if I ever want to go back to the stock cluster plugs, I can just undo this, put the plugs back on where they go, and a stock cluster will work perfectly. Now what I'm going to do is tape it up. Okay, so now I've taped it up very tight, and if you notice, I folded the wire over so it's a nice straight line. I put a lot of tape on it. It is not just one thin film. Make sure that when you do this, you squeeze and press down every little nook and cranny so it is on there nice and tight. I know I'm catching hell for this. Now you could cut this and solder the wires, but then you are permanently an S2000 cluster forever. If you make a mistake, you then have to cut the wire, resolder it, and do all that stuff. So this also makes it easier in case you make a mistake and go back and you need to correct it. That's wire number 1. Okay, A2 was the green wire, trunk ajar, which is going to the green plug. A11, which is this guy right here. Yellow is power, and it goes to B4 on the cluster. Now the next one on the A plug is yellow with green, and it's A4, and it is the temp gauge. Now this we're going to leave here for now because we have to hook up the Modify and to get the temperature gauge to work correctly. So we're gonna move on to black, which is ground. Okay, the black ground went to B8 and 9. So I ran both of those to a ground. Next up is green with an orange stripe, and that's the check engine light. The check engine light went to D14. Okay, so the next light up was the blue and red, and then that's an ABS light, which we're not using on this. We may need to do something with the S2000 cluster later. We're gonna figure that out later. I think we have to ground some wires out. We'll get to that. The next line was the green and red for the brake light, and that is going to plug D9 right here. Okay, so we used the last one, which was the red and green, which went to A10, which is the high beam indicator. And pretty much we are done with the A plug. So we're moving right along. We're going to move on to the B plug. Okay, so here's the B plug. Now it should be noted that they count them in the opposite direction. So this one right here, the yellow and white wire on the end here, that is B1, and then B12. B12 is all the way down on the end. This first one here that's white and yellow, it is the fuel gauge wire. So we're gonna inject that and hook it up. So I've got the fuel gauge, yellow with the white wire, going to C8 on the S2000C cluster plug. And just to iterate what I'm doing here is that I have the AP1 and AP2 pinouts, but you have to look at it, make sure it's correct. Here on this side, the plugs to reference, and then I have the EG plugs here. So I look on here, and then I look on here, I match them up, and then I just use this as a reference for where they all go, and then hook them up accordingly. So that's just the process that I'm using. You can do it too, whether it's a CRX, whether it's an Integra or an RSX, whatever you need to do, you should be able to use this process. The next wire was the yellow with blue, but that's the speedometer wire. We're gonna wait on that because obviously we have special hookups for the speedometer. The next one was green with yellow stripe, which is the right turn signal indicator, and it is going to A8 on the S2000 cluster plug. Okay, so green and blue was the left hand turn signal, and that goes to A7. Okay, B5, the blue and white, which is the alternator charging light, goes to D11. Okay, the oil pressure light, which is yellow and red, goes to D13. Everybody's favorite wire, straight blue wire, is the tachometer wire, and it goes to C5. Okay, so the last three wires are black and yellow. So black and yellow is going to B5 right here. And then red and black, which is another power wire, is going to B3. And then the red, the straight dimmer switch, goes to the D plug, so D6. Now all this looks like a crazy, insane mess. This is pretty much all the wires that you need to do. We still got to do the temperature and the Speedo healer, but now we're going to plug it in and check it and make sure everything works. So I've got all four plugs plugged up to the back of the cluster. And we're going to see if this thing works. Always test before you kind of put everything back. Key on. Oh, we got power. Working. So we've got the blinker, left turn signal, right turn signal. It dims down when you turn the lights on. Brake light, it's working. Let's see, the check engine light is on because I don't have a secondary O2 sensor for my K series. Got to get K Pro for that. The gas gauge is working. The temperature gauge is not working. I have to hook the Modify up and the Speedo healer for the miles per hour. So, continue to move on. Okay, now for the Speedo healer. I know this looks like an absolute mess right now. I'm gonna clean all these wires up and really straighten them out, but just about all the cluster wires have been taken care of and wired in. Now, the Speedo healer, which is this little awesome box right here, which basically communicates the car Speedo to the S2000 cluster Speedo. It has two plugs, one that says TSM, which you're not really going to use because it's a toggle switch for top speed, things like that. But it has a 4-prong plug that runs here. So here it comes, this big black wire here comes over here, and it has 4 wires. Now this might seem complicated, but it's very simple. The power wire is red, and I'm running it to the original power supply coming from the car, okay? Now, the black is ground, okay? And I ran that to the black wire that comes out of the dash harness, all right? So simple enough, you got power and ground, red and black. Now you have 2 more wires, which are white and green. All right, so the green is going to go to the S2000 cluster, which is VSS input, which is C3. So I'm running that into plug C3 right here. So that wire is going to the green, and the white wire is going to the yellow and blue wire. That is the original speed sensor wire. Okay, so there's 4 wires: power, ground, signal in, and signal out. So the signal in tells the Speedo healer, you know, what the signal is, and then the green wire tells the S2000 cluster what the signal needs to be. Now, when you use these, you have to calibrate them, and I will tell you, it is crazy. All right, it's crazy. The easiest way to do that is you have to download Speedo Healer app. Okay, the SH version 4 app. So I have a GPS speed calculator, and what you have to do is drive down the road, see what your speed is, and then see what number displays on the S2000 cluster. Now the S2000 cluster would only display the number 2, as if I'm going 2 kilometers an hour. So once you figure out what speed that you use, what you do is you use the calculator, and it gives you a certain measurement data. So the display was 2 miles an hour supposedly, and then 45 miles an hour, which I was actually going to. And then you hit generate a calculation. Now it will give you directions on what buttons to press on this little computer, because otherwise it's just going to show 0, 1, or 2. It's going to show nothing. Okay, now this is also a JDM cluster that only displays in kilometers. However, thanks to the Speedo healer, it displays how fast I'm going in miles per hour. What I did is I put that calculation in, I followed the directions, and now it displays my miles per hour while driving down the road. I already went ahead and checked that just to make sure, so I could explain to you guys how it works. Also, there was 2 other wires I had to run. It was giving me an ABS light and an SRS light. So if you notice, when I turn it on, there is no SRS light or ABS light any longer. The reason why is because the SRS light, which is A4, which is this wire right here, A4, the green plug, I ran to the power. You have to add power to that wire, all right? And that turns off the SRS light. And then for the ABS light, which is D8, I ran to the ground. If you run it to the ground, it turns off the ABS light, and if you run the SRS to a power, it turns off the SRS light. So now I only have the proper working lights that I need. Okay, so I went ahead and cleaned everything up. It just kind of zip tied everything into place. So I've got these wires zip tied together. We don't need those anymore, so we can shove those in the back like that. And then we have the one harness coming out like this. Now we have one more wire to hook up and one more wire to deal with, and then I'm gonna finally, you know, tighten all this stuff up. These are the wires that we didn't even need. It's a lot of them. Got these separated nice so that it plugs up to the cluster nice. Now we're going to figure out how to work this modified ECT2 for an AP1. It's got a couple of wires you got to plug into it. You put them in there, use a little screwdriver. Obviously, power, ground, then the gauge cluster, and then the sensor itself, and that should be it. Should be ready to go. Okay, so losing daylight here. Took a little longer than I thought, but here I've got the harness completely tied up. Here's the Modify ECT-2 AP1 cluster. Your wiring and calibration is going to be different for your application, meaning it's different for a K series than it is a B series. If you have a B series, you're going to tee off of the ECU plug. The K series has its own independent temperature sensor, so it's a little different. Now I got to get the thing in here. Now I got to put the gauge cluster back in here, tie everything up, and finish it up. Okay, I've got the bezel piece in here. I'll be honest, it's not secured super tight right now. I'm gonna have to figure that out later. Not bad. Looks pretty good. So yeah, I've got a little bit more tweaking to do with the cluster, but pretty much everything is there. The modify temperature sensors are a little tweaky, and because I don't have it grounded near the thermostat or near the temperature sensor, I think that's why I'm getting such a high reading. It also changes the sensitivity of the gauge cluster as well, so they move around. Okay, so I did figure out my temperature gauge issue. Had to run a ground to the engine, so I'm going to have to route it through the engine bay tomorrow, but at least we figured it out. Everything's working properly. Anyway guys, this is where I'm gonna go ahead and end the video. Thank you guys so much for watching. Click like if you liked the video, click subscribe if you haven't before. Gonna be getting back at it tomorrow with some more videos. Gonna be putting in Charlie's K-swap finally and getting ready for Import Alliance. Got some more things to do to the EJ1, as well as I'm gonna be doing a D-Series transmission rebuild this week. So stay tuned. I'll see you in the next one. Peace out, keep living your dreams.